Huzzah!
I'm Julian.
And I'm Tom. Hi, everybody.
We're here because we are getting prepped for The Rings of Power, which drops here soon. For those of you joining us, we went through the Lord of the Rings movies. We did not watch any of the 8 Hobbit movies, but we watched the trilogy. We did some trivia. We've got some trailers that have dropped about this show, so what we're doing on this episode is just talking about kind of what we're anticipating for the series, what you see in the trailer. If you are looking for like deep dive, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, as someone who's reading the Silmarillion right now, if you're looking for like deep dive nerd stuff, Tom and I are probably not your lore masters. There's certain things we're very knowledgeable on. Tom, what are we knowledgeable on? Exactly.
I don't know, like ice cream, bananas,
yes,
potatoes.
Not how to make ice cream, but I would assume our knowledge is how to eat ice cream. Is there any?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm very hungry, if you cannot tell.
Oh, okay. All those things were food related. We can't cook it or make it, but by golly, we can eat it. Anyways, The Rings of Power is coming out and it's on Amazon Prime. So for those of you that don't know, Amazon is a book-selling website that you can join. And if you pay them money once a year, they have some TV shows. So TV shows are books on TV, and that's the correlation. That's why a bookstore makes TV shows. Anyways,
That makes sense. I just learned something.
there you go. The Rings of Power is based on some books, tying it all back together. Good for me. These episodes, the first one drops what day, Tom?
I think it'll be Thursday, September 1st, and the second one is going to air directly after the next day on the 2nd. And then from there, they'll be dropped each week, I believe, on Thursdays.
Okay, so just to reiterate, September 1st is the first episode dropping. September 2nd is the second episode dropping. Depending on where you are in the world, that might be a different day in the week. I don't know how calendars work. So what Tom and I are going to do is we both just watched the trailer that came out. Tom's going to give us a bit of a summary based on some research he's done on what this is going to entail. Obviously, not obviously, but like Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, has like a huge history. He built languages, he built cultures, all these things. And so this series is not going to be like during the Fellowship of the Ring, Twin Tower, Return of the King, that timeline. And so Tom's going to go
Two
through...
Towers.
Two Towers, what did I say?
Twin Towers is something different.
Twin Towers is... Ooh, too soon, Julian. All right. So Tom's going to go through a bit of the summary. We're just going to talk about some of the stuff we're excited about. And once again, I am working my way through the Silmarillion right now, and I'll speak to what that's been like. But Tom, as someone who has done some research on what this series is going to be, what can we look forward to?
Yeah, before I get into it, can I ask, is the Silmarillion like a massive novel, or is it like in the same vein of one of the Lord of the Rings books?
So the Silmarillion is, the version I have is about 300 pages. I would say it's broken up into Tolkien's writings, and it's edited by his son, Christopher Tolkien. So it wasn't like he sat down and wrote a like novel from beginning to end that makes sense. I would say it's more like the front. It's like a mythology and history book, and then it's got some cool like fables inside where we talk about like major battles, major relationships, like power struggles that happen. I did not tweet this, but I thought about it a lot. Tolkien, in writing the Silmarillion, he has like a whole origin story about how the world is built and how like Arda is built, which essentially is Earth and that universe. And so he pulls a lot from like Norse mythology and like different types of creation stories in order to build it. It takes, in a 300-page book, it takes a page and a half for a character in the book to stray from harmony with everyone else in order to selfishly try and gain power and renown. And like that is a theme that just runs through not only human nature, but what Tolkien does so well in terms of like telling stories. A lot of times the conflict is, hey, this person felt prideful, so they tried to take power from this person or wanted power, and that's where the struggle comes from. So to answer your question, it's like a scattered history book, and so it can get very dense and like, I don't know. Tom, as someone who graduated from like several universities, did you really love picking up a history book and like reading names, places? Like he does it. Don't get me wrong. It's interesting, but there are times where I'm like, I think I can skip this paragraph and I'm not going to lose much. But
right.
yeah, it's essentially a history, and he creates myths and backstory. But then it does get into like the cool, like, hey, this high elf had to go, have a last stand against Morgoth and fought to the bitter end. Like there is some like action and battle, but at the same time, it's a history book, essentially.
Gotcha. Well, and this show, I think, is always going to be compared with Game of Thrones, just in terms of like the high fantasy elements and everything that are in it. And didn't George R. R. Martin just recently do that with like that Fire and Blood book, which is like a lot of prequel stuff, and it's just more or less supposed to be like written from one of the maesters, kind of like the priests or whatever of their time, or doctors of their time, and kind of gave a lot of the lore of the old houses and everything that kind of happened before what we saw in the Game of Thrones series, for those who watch that as well. So it is kind of interesting, and also funny too that both these series are like dropping right at the same time. So if you are a fantasy lover, now's a fantastic time for television.
Right. I didn't really make that connection, but that book by George R. R. Martin is sitting on my shelf right now. I haven't read it yet, but you're right. Both of these series are, hey, let's take the 1,000-year before history and let's make it into some sort of narrative story, because that's what the people want. They want confusing names, confusing genealogies, but really cool set pieces and effects. So yeah, I didn't make that connection, and I'm not watching the Game of Thrones one right now because all of my brain power is going towards Middle-earth.
Right. There's a lot of characters to know in the Game of Thrones series, as there will be in this one. So, but yeah, I think I'm certainly more excited about this series because I think there's a lot more can kind of come to it. Obviously, we were super excited, watched through the original trilogy, which we think absolutely held up 20 years later. And knowing that Amazon has just thrown gobs of money, I think $500 million towards the production and design and CG and everything that goes into this. It looks awesome, and these trailers, I think, show it. So from my understanding, the general idea is it's set during the second age of Middle-earth, which I guess the second age like spans thousands of years. So there's plenty of room for source material for them to kind of pick through, at least like in terms of like timing. We know a lot of the characters from watching the original trilogy lived a very long time as well. So we have Galadriel is going to appear in this as kind of a younger version of herself, played by Cate Blanchett in the movies. We have Elrond, who's also going to appear in this because elves seemingly live forever until they decide to go to a boat and hang out and have some margaritas. I don't know what they do. Yep. So this is, and again, as reference, so the second age of Middle-earth is when this is supposed to take place. For those that watched the original trilogy, that was set in the end of the third age. So I think the idea is the second age ends with the last battle of elves and men, where Isildur takes the ring from Sauron. So I think this also is going to chart the rise of Sauron as he sows chaos and kind of bends the land to his will. And then ultimately the forging of these rings of power, which, spoiler alert, it's in the title. So I think a lot of it is just seemingly Sauron and ring origin story, which I am all for. Because I think in the movies we got the sense of his evil and his power, but we don't get to see him. All we really see is Galadriel's exposition in the beginning of Fellowship, where she talks about the battle and you see Sauron in all of his might and armor, and he just looks incredible.
Right. Yeah, and from and once again, I'm not going to dive into the nerddom of this, but it is origin, earth building, age 1, Valar, and then it's elves, and to your point that you made, elves are supposed to be immune to death. Not immune to death, I'm sorry. They're supposed to live forever, unless, unfortunately, they take an orc blade to the back of the head in Helm's Deep, which isn't in the books. But what you also get is the character I mentioned earlier, who it takes a page and a half for him to realize he wants like renown and power, is Morgoth, Melkor, or then known as Morgoth, and Sauron is like his main lieutenant dude. So it's kind of fun that this one, and so the Silmarillion, a lot of it takes place before the Rings of Power. And so what I think is interesting, and it's going to be fun with this show, I hope, is like they kind of have some room to play. Like where Fellowship of the Rings, the Two Towers, and the Return of the King, like that's pretty spelled out. And I think Peter Jackson did a pretty good job of like he went along the lines with the books. This stuff that they're playing with here is like, hey, there are some characters that are established, there's some world building that's established, but like, and as we'll see when we look at the cast, like these showrunners and people have the ability to make stuff up and play inside this world. So what I think makes that fun is like you go into the Lord of the Rings and you're like, oh, that's not how I pictured it. Oh, this is like, this world is a little bit more flexible in terms of you're not going to have a bunch of people being like, oh, well, that's not how it happened, because, you know, they're creating things. And so, and the other thing I wanted to mention is, for those of you that have like stuck with us on this podcast where we started with Ted Lasso and we got to here, we are not a Lord of the Rings podcast. We're not going to dive into the lore of this. Like the joy of Tom and I getting to discuss these stories is like, hey, is there like a deeper level to this? And I know most of the stuff we talk about is superficial, but like there are some themes that you're hoping come out in these stories that are important and like that you can grab onto. We've talked about it during the Lord of the Rings one. So the hope is that this show is well done enough that there's some deeper meaning and stuff we can glean from it, as opposed to it just being like no offense to Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones is like violence and like I don't feel like I'm getting is this a controversial statement? I don't feel like I'm getting a whole lot from a Game of Thrones episode. Like there are some great themes, there's some great characters, but where you take like a Tolkien story, I think you can get some more out of it. And that's why I'm looking forward to, and I hope they've added the stuff, like those things that you learn from the trilogy, into this show.
No, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's why we love the trilogy. It wasn't just like a Michael Bay action explosion movie or whatever. It
Michael
had
Bay
to say,
would do a great job with the Lord of the Rings movie. Tom, sign me up now. Spinning American flag shots. Lots of like, I don't know, slow-mo. Give me a great soundtrack. Michael Bay. Michael Bay.
Yeah, I don't think Michael Bay is one of the directors, but I don't know. We'll just see when we get to the cast and crew section. But yeah, I'm with you. It's going to be a fun ride. I hope they do it justice with the different characters that we've already know and love from the original trilogy, and now being able to see them kind of in their younger forms with Galadriel and Elrond should be pretty cool. I guess this also follows the rise and fall of the island kingdom of, and again, I'm sure I'll pronounce this incorrectly, Numenor. Which is apparently the descendants of humans who ultimately found Gondor and Rohan. So more or less where Aragorn's descendants come from. So it'd be interesting to kind of see. And again, I don't know all of it. Is that name familiar to you?
Yeah,
is that in the
Numenor.
Silmarillion?
I think you pronounced it correctly. That's how It's funny, you read these books and you don't have to pronounce them out loud. So like your mind is like, because I remember having a conversation with my brother once after reading Lord of the Rings, and he pronounced Galadriel, and like that's not how that name like sounded in my head. I pronounced that one wrong, but anyways, yeah, it's going to be about those descendants, and ultimately Aragorn comes from that line. So big connection here is, and I know you're excited about this because you're a guy that really loves Kiwis, is I think they filmed this in New Zealand as well, right?
Yes, I did read that. Yeah, this first season was filmed there. From what I read, they apparently aren't going to shoot the second season there. They might move it to Britain or the United Kingdom area. But yeah, super cool that they kind of tied that back into Jackson's world, because I think in terms of like rights and I don't know, like they Amazon has loosely based, I guess, some of the content on Jackson's world, like how he maybe designed some of the characters or some of the elements. But, Jackson is not involved at all. They didn't consort with him. They didn't necessarily take the exact character elements from the trilogies. And I don't know, do you think that's a good or a bad thing?
Well, I like what Peter Jackson did. I mean, we talked about this when we talked about the trilogy, but like a fantasy series can go so bad. It can look like hokey. It can look weird. But he did such a great job, like making things look elegant, making them look real, making them look practical, that I would love if he was involved. But I also don't need this to be 24 episodes based on like a chapter of The Hobbit, as he is want to extend out things. But I think it's interesting that like you speak to the rights of Peter Jackson rather than like whoever has the rights to Tolkien's.
Right.
And I don't know, I guess it would be fascinating if someone else came in and like made it their own vision. But because the trilogy, Peter Jackson's trilogy, is so familiar to me, I don't mind that it, like when you watch the trailer, it feels like they come from the same like world and place and style. So
agreed. Yeah.
It's like meeting an old friend in a different place. Like I think I'm excited about that, as opposed to like them making it like weirdly like gritty and I don't know, dark like the last Batman
Christopher Nolan
movie.
version.
Yeah, I'd be like, okay. Actually, I probably would love that version. But that's just a little bit about me. So no, I'm based on the visuals of the trailer and stuff, I'm excited because I think it's a close cousin to Peter Jackson's world.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's exactly what I'd like to. He's obviously the one that put this in, mainstream and made Tolkien's work kind of become what it is. And now everybody knows what hobbits are, whether you like that series or not, and the Lord of the Rings movies. So it'd be a disservice, I think, if they completely throw out all of his work.
You know how during the trilogy, whenever someone's presented with the ring, they have like this like lean in, like they're gonna grab it, and then like the good ones are like, no, I've passed the test. I was like flicking through movies to watch with my spouse, and The Hobbit came up, and I was like, I could feel myself like drawn to it, and I was like, oh, I should just press play. I should gain all the power of The Hobbit, and then I'm locked in for 8 movies. And I said no. I said, no, I'm going to live my life and not watch those movies because I don't know why I'm stubborn. But speaking of things that have been lengthened and like, do you know, like I know they've got this season. I think I read somewhere they're like, obviously they've already been picked. I love when shows do this. We've been picked up for a second season. No one's watched it.
Yeah.
Like The Outer Range. God knows no one's watched it. We don't know if they're getting a second season. Do you know, are they set for more than 2, or do you know what this is going to be?
Yeah, from what I read, they've got like 50 hours of material that they either want to write or have the rights to write or whatever. Because the showrunners have said that they want to do, I think, up to 5 seasons. From what I've read too, the showrunners have said that they're trying to set up things like in season 1 that are not going to pay off till season 5, which is to me a good thing to hear. Like I like showrunners and writers that have a gist and an outline of where they want to go. Because I think what happened like with Game of Thrones, that is a show that just petered out because they ran out of source material. They didn't know where they were going to go in those 2 showrunners, and it just kind of became a befuddled mess kind of towards the end. I think like Stranger Things is another show that has, it's the opposite of that, where those Duffer Brothers know where they want to go. They know the beats. They know how they want to tell the story. I think if you have that in mind, it's just, it lends itself to like rewatches and things like that, especially if they're saying things that they're writing and putting into motion in season 1 are going to have big payoffs for season 5. So obviously Amazon's throwing loads of money at it. They have the rights to this material. I'm sure they're going to milk this out because everybody's been trying to find a Game of Thrones replacement ever since that went off the air. And I'm hopeful that this is going to be it.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this is just as good as the Wheel of Time series that Amazon put all that money into, because that series was great. I didn't watch more than 15 minutes of it. Rosamund Pike's super cool, though. I'll say that.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Are you familiar with, like, you mentioned the showrunners, and it's funny to think about, like, the term showrunner is a term I didn't know when I was younger, but nowadays I hear it all the time. And I start to think to myself, Grandpa who fought in World War II, did he give one care who a showrunner was or what a showrunner was? No, he did not. But I'm going to embrace the time that I live in because I can't go back. Are you familiar with who's running this show?
I hadn't heard of either of these names. Apparently, they're longtime friends. It's John D. Payne or J.D. Payne and
I'm
Patrick
glad they're
McKay.
friends, Tom. I'm glad they're longtime friends. I hope they start a podcast that takes up most of their day and time. But they really enjoy doing because it's a good excuse.
If
to
season
chat
1
with
is a
friends.
mess, we can come on for season 2 through 4 or 2 through 5.
Sure,
We'll take the reins.
sure.
I mean, these guys don't have, looking at their pedigree, apparently they were involved, and I don't know if they finished it or just were a part of it, but they were part of the Star Trek franchise at one point. They did that Jungle Cruise movie with The Rock and Emily Blunt.
Oh, you
which
don't
was
have to
fine.
tell me. You don't have to tell me who's in the Jungle Cruise. I know who's in the Jungle Cruise. Have you seen the backside of water, Tom? The Jungle Cruise is incredible. I've actually never seen that movie, but that joke has always stuck with me. And actually, I really like the Chris Pine, the first Star Trek movie. That movie's great. You want to know who else is in that movie? Chris Hemsworth. 2 Chris's in the same movie. So that's something.
Yes.
Father and son, a father and son duo. Sorry, I interrupted. Keep going.
No, but I think those are like the biggest things. Apparently, they're also tied to Flash Gordon. Apparently, they're doing like a remake of the Flash Gordon franchise, but that's kind of TBD. Hopefully, this gets really big and they don't focus on that because I could care less about Flash Gordon. But there you have it. There's apparently
Does
a
Flash
slew
Gordon
of writers.
run really fast? What's Flash Gordon's thing, Tom? As a Flash Gordon guy, you just stated you love Flash
I don't
Gordon.
know.
What's his thing?
It was like 80s, I think, and yeah, he
All right,
like
we can
was in
move on.
space and fought
I'm
random
already,
guys. I don't
I'm
know what
already
it is.
out on it. Yeah.
I'm
No, thank
bored.
you.
It's got a slew of writers. I think both Payne and McKay did quite a bit of writing for it, but I guess kind of the featured ones are Jennifer Hutchinson, who was very famous for her writing on Breaking Bad. So anybody involved in Breaking Bad, involved in this show, I'm excited about.
Sure.
Also Helen Chang, who also wrote for Hannibal, which I never watched that series, but what I heard is it was very well received and a cool show.
Sure. I can't believe they got all those elephants over the mountains to attack Rome. Incredible.
I don't get that reference.
It's fine. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
There'll be 3 audience
I
members that'll
watched
get it.
Breaking Bad. I never watched Hannibal.
Breaking Bad's fantastic. Better Saul Call, also fantastic.
Okay. I'll call him later.
We've got directors. So apparently we got 8 episodes in this first season. We've got directors for all of them. So the first 2 are J.A. Boyana. He apparently wrote for Jurassic World, which I'll be honest, not very enthused about that because Jurassic World, I guess it looked kind of neat, but like Jurassic World, the first one was fun. Fallen Kingdom and Dominion were just terrible, terrible movies.
Listen,
So-
I just want to watch content about the Velociraptor Blue. That's all I care about in my life. Actually, someone tweeted something, and I mean, shout out to them, and it was like, the Jurassic Park series really overestimated how much I care about the Velociraptor Blue. I do not care about Blue. And I was like, yeah. This dude's got it. This dude's got his finger on the pulse.
Well,
but
and
cool,
all
Jurassic
what's his face
Park.
does is just point at more dinosaurs to make them not move in the Dominion, the last movie. Just so it, wouldn't recommend it.
I
Move
love
on.
Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt's great.
The middle 4 were directed by Wayne Chi Yip, who was apparently involved in Wheel of Time and the Doctor Who franchise.
Oh, no.
So don't know what we'll get from that. But the last two were directed by Charlotte Brandstrom, who did The Witcher, which Witcher is kind of like love it or hate it. The first season, I don't know if you watched that, was kind of, they did some timey-wimey stuff where they played around with like beginning of the story, end of the story. You know my love for timey-wimey. Second season was a lot better. They did kind of a straightforward storyline, but obviously high fantasy. If you can do good stories in that, you can likely transition into the Lord of the Rings franchise pretty well.
We watched some of The Witcher. I couldn't watch too much of it because, what is his name? Who's the main guy that plays? Who's Superman?
Henry Cavill.
Henry Cavill intimidates me, and I felt threatened as a man, so I couldn't watch The Witcher. I've never seen one episode of Doctor Who. There's something about a show that's been on for 80 years that I just don't feel like I can hop in and enjoy. Although that one actor that we both like played Doctor Who for a little while. And then Wheel of Time, I guess what I'm getting at is all of these directors are in shows that I gave a try to but didn't. So I'm not going to say I'm not going to watch Rings of Power now, Tom, but I'm now a little bit concerned, but it's okay.
Yeah, I kind of had the same feeling. Like some of the, like they're all fantasy shows. So again, like just the action sequences, they're probably going to be well suited for that bit. But the hope is really the writing. Like if the writing is good and on point, the directing should kind of fade into the background.
Sure.
But we'll see. Cast. Okay, we've got a massive cast, which is to be understood in a Lord of the Rings franchise. I will do my best at some of these names. I'm sure I will butcher them. But we've got Morfydd Clark, who plays Galadriel. Robert Aramayo, who plays Elrond. And have you seen either of these characters or these actors from anything else? None of them were familiar.
They mentioned that Morfydd Clark was from the Dark Materials, that HBO show.
Okay.
I believe, but I did not watch it. She's like the main character, it seems, in the trailers, which is great. I mean, obviously we loved her in the trilogy, and so it'll be interesting to watch what they do with her in this series. Elrond is played by Mr. Smith from The Matrix in the original series, but not played by him in this. So that'll be fun. One of these actors, either Elrond or the guy that plays Celebrimbor, they look like Neil Patrick Harris, and it throws me off a little bit. But
I could see it.
A lot of this cast, and sometimes this is like, take Game of Thrones for instance. Like, other than Sean Bean, was there a single person, and maybe Baratheon, like there wasn't anyone you recognized in that cast. So I do find it fun when they take a series like this and they throw you in with characters that, or at least cast members that you don't have a relationship with. Stranger Things is kind of the same thing. You don't have a relationship with that cast other than Winona, who obviously was a country singer prior to being in that show.
Correct. No, but I'm with you. Yeah, I'm kind of glad I don't have any kind of preconceived notions of what these characters were before this, so I'm not thinking of them as that character. Who else we got? We got High King Gilgalad, played by Benjamin Walker. Do you know who this cat is?
I don't. He's very handsome.
Yep, super handsome. Apparently the last High King of the Elves. And then we've got Celebrimbor, sure, if that's how you pronounce it, played by Charles Edwards. Charles Edwards, he's that psychic guy, right? Tells everybody what's going on with their
crossing
relatives.
Over. Yep, crossing over.
Yep. Charles Edwards.
I've watched more episodes of Crossing Over than I care to count. I think Charles Edwards is in, like, The Crown. I would venture to say the majority of these actors are, like, British stage actors because that's just what they do with these shows, and they do a great job. Celebrimbor, from the lore that I looked up prior to doing this podcast, is he's going to be in the line of Fëanor, and he is the guy that creates the 3 rings of power for the elves. So real good with a hammer, an anvil, and jewelry, and probably someone that is worth marrying, I guess, because they can make rings.
Yeah, I mean, just depends on your bag.
Sure.
We've got Orendir, played by Ismael Cruz Cordova, who I think is the kind of new Legolas, if you will. He seems to be kind of the younger archer elf.
Okay. Yeah, from what I read, I don't know that this character is lore. I think they created him for the series. But if he stops, stares into the distance, and says something like, "The moon is orange tonight, pumpkin spice has been consumed," then I think we're all good, right?
Oh man, I hope that's a line.
I hope it's a line too. This is why I don't write for television or movies. Only for radio.
We've got Elendil, played by Lloyd Owen. Don't know who this cat is. Never seen him.
I don't know who he is either, but he is supposed to be... Elendil is the man from Numenor. That sounds like a play. He's the man from Numenor, and he is ultimately, his descendants, I believe, found Gondor and Rohan. He is of that race that is important.
Okay,
to that.
of that line. Gotcha. We've got Sophia Nomvet, who plays Princess Disa, and then Prince Durin IV, played by Owen Arthur. I think these are the dwarvish characters.
Right. And Durin's important because he is the Lord of Moria, and everything goes well for him. Kingdom thrives. They're still going today. They're just down there mining, not digging too deep, not waking anything that should have been resting in flame and shadow, just living his best life. That's for sure. Tom, let's talk about the trailer, because we've both watched the trailer a couple of times. I'll kick this off just by saying, like, it looks cool. Like, it looks great. Mm-hmm. Like, as we talked about before, it looks like we kind of took Peter Jackson's vision and we're turning it into a TV series. So no complaints there, because visually I think it looks great.
Yeah, I mean, the set pieces, the character design, like even the costumes that you see on like some of these elves and like the armor just look absolutely incredible. And obviously they have a little bit more money. CG is a little bit better nowadays than it was for the original trilogy. So far what I've seen from the trailer, CG looks absolutely on point. And for how much money they threw at it, it would make sense that it would.
You said that the budget for this is like $500 million. And I think
so,
when
yeah.
we talked about the other Lord of the Rings movies, their budgets were like $90 million, probably around that, right? So
a piece, or
I think a piece, yeah. I think each one was like $90 million, somewhere in there. If we're wrong, you can write us at teambingepodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet at us at teambinge, or you can Instagram us a picture. Please, no more genitals, because it is getting old. At our Instagram handle, which is genitals at teambinge, Instagram.com. I don't know how Instagram works.
What else we get in this trailer? We get the orcs. The orcs look super cool. I love like their armor. There's a couple shots I think in some of the earlier trailers, not in this most recent one, but where they do some close-ups and they get like the skeletal armor that they're wearing. They look really menacing and fantastic.
The trailer starts with Galadriel, who, as I mentioned before, seems to be kind of the central character of the series, which is great because we love Galadriel in the trilogy. I'm reading the Silmarillion, and there is apparently a section about the Second Age that talks about like the events of this, but it's, once again, they have a lot of room to play. So I have not finished. I mean, I've read it before, but I'm going through it again, and so it'll be interesting. Like, they are making Galadriel out to be like a warrior in this. In fact, there's even a line where it's like, where she's talking about being a warrior. And so as I go through the source material, I'll be interested to see whether or not they've like magnified that, whether or not that's what the story is about. Because it would have been cool in the trilogy had she been, out there slaying dudes.
Right.
But speaking of bad CGI, because Tom talked all over me and we had to edit this part. Galadriel becomes that big blue monster, and she's like, "I've passed the test. I will decay and go to the Grey Havens. Anyways, in this show, nothing about Galadriel is decaying. She's vibrant and great. The start of the trailer I find interesting is some dude apparently getting stabbed by an orc. She's like, my brother spent his life hunting orcs, and you see him dead, and she takes his dagger, which she then stabs into ice later as she's trying to climb an ice wall, which that is the first image that I saw from this series. Like, they shot that shot where she jumps and Tom Cruises her way into climbing a ice wall.
Yeah.
Like Mission Impossible 2, which is quite possibly the best movie ever made. That's not true. I'm sorry for all those involved.
I feel like it was a Super Bowl ad, wasn't it? Didn't they do this as a teaser?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think they did. And then I voted on the wrong, or I bet on the wrong team, and that's why my kids aren't going to college.
And that's why we're podcasting. But I do like how they seemingly are centralizing the story around a female heroine, because I think that was something that the original series and the movies was certainly lacking. It had female characters, but they weren't necessarily pushing the story around. Female characters they did have were very strong and awesome, so it's great to see them focusing on Galadriel and kind of her younger life as a warrior, as opposed to just the exposition reader that she was in the movie trilogy.
Sure. The one thing I wanted to point out about the trailer that I think all trailers do this for something that's supposed to be epic and great. They're like, hey, what motivational memes can we throw out during the trailer? And I get what they're doing. This is not a complaint, but it's you have to decide who you will be, and you have to will you choose faith and not fear. It's all these very and you're there's something about the dialogue in the trilogy and the things that happen where the lessons are natural. I don't know how to explain this, but Gandalf sitting at the well in the Mines of Moria with Frodo, and he's pity, no, pity is what stayed Bilbo's hand. Can you choose who deserves death and who deserves life? All people live through days that are dark and they don't want to, but it's what they choose to do with those. Those today would be a weird motivational poster that your manager would slap in the office wall, and you'd be like, all right, kitten, don't fall from that fan. But so they do it in these trailers, and my hope is that it's not cheesy, I guess, is what I'm getting at. I don't know if that makes sense, but I have a lot of hope for this series, and I refuse to walk into the Shadow and Flame, and I really want them to pull it off.
Yeah, you mentioned at the top, fantasy, it's a very, a razor's edge. You can just, it doesn't take much for you to kind of fall off and then just become every other fantasy genre out there. But I'm hopeful, like you mentioned, that there's source materials there, not necessarily, it's more of a sandbox. These showrunners have the ability to take these characters and mold them a little bit, but you still have that good source material, and hopefully the writers are going to give us some good stuff as opposed to just cheesy one-liners. We don't want this all to be just Legolas, right? We need King Theoden lines and speeches and things in here.
We need King Theoden every day of our lives. King Theoden. Unfortunately, Showmane killed him. No, Snowmane. Sorry. Thank you, Tom. Go listen to our trivia podcast episode, and you'll understand why my flub right there made sense.
I do like the final line, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you get the final line where she's I think Elrond mentions, you've been fighting long enough, put up your sword. And then Galadriel's response, without it, what am I to be? And then boom, cuts the Rings of Power, which I think is a cool, powerful ending of her being an undefiable warrior here.
Right. I do the way she delivers the one line about there is a tempest inside of me is such a great, powerful role and line. So I am excited about this. It's one of those things where you're super excited about it, and you're just will they land it? Can they pull it off? As I mentioned at the top, the joy of this one is I don't have 3 detailed books that I have to be no, that's not how this happened. This should happen this way. This is like deep cuts. It's part of the Silmarillion if you dig deep enough. I would go out on a limb and say that the majority of like Lord of the Rings, like fans of the movies and even the original like books, probably haven't read the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion's dense. Like it's like I'm not gonna lie, I was reading it today, and then an hour later my wife was like, hey, you shouldn't nap at 6 p.m. You should wake up. And I was like, oh, and I had fallen asleep, which isn't to say the book's not good or boring. It's just dense. And so in fact, I'm just getting to the good part, which is like the elves and men are running around and there's power struggles and there's fights. So I'm excited about this. I am going to probably have questions as we work our way through this in terms of who's who and what's what and where they're going. But I'm excited for it. And to your point, they put so much money into it. How can it not be good? You know?
Exactly.
When is something they put a ton of money into not been good? You know?
I think they have released the first 2 episodes kind of early. At the time we're recording this podcast, they have done like premieres of it. I think they are doing like early screenings for certain folks around the world. From what I've read review-wise, it's been very, very well received. Both critics and fans alike have very much enjoyed these first 2. I think there is going to probably be a lot of setup. I think they're going to be a little bit slower because you're developing all these characters. You're going to have like different storylines, and we'll have like probably some sequences with the hobbits, some with the dwarves, and I would imagine at a certain point we'll probably start seeing them all kind of clash and come together. But I'm with you, man. Like I'm excited. I'm hopeful this isn't like an Outer Range kind of deal. We watch the first 2, we're like, yeah, this is going to be cool, and then it slowly kind of gets weirder and weirder and peters out. But I've got high hopes for it, and excited to get back into Middle Earth now in the Second Age.
I would assume Outer Range and Middle Earth at some point are going to share a universe because they're both Amazon properties, and that's how things work. So
fall in that hole, you make your way to Middle Earth.
That's right. And then Josh Brolin, as a rancher, is going to have this sweet glove with a bunch of jewels on it, and he's going to be like, Sauron, these jewels were made by you. And then he's going to like fist bump someone, and a bunch of people are going to disappear. I think that's how it all works. Anyways, you can reach us with all of your disgruntled comments at teambingepodcast@gmail.com. We are active on Twitter at teambinge.
Listen, I don't know. If you're listening to this, you know the internet works. Figure it out. You can find us.
Okay. The only thing we ask of people is if you're offended by the majority of the stuff we say, please donate to redcross.org, which is our rival podcast. And so when you give them money, we get upset. And so that is how that works. I have been Julian.
And I have been Tom. And we'll see you in Middle Earth.